you to everyone who's joined the At the Virtual Table live stream tonight. We'll be getting started in just about 30 seconds. Thank you again to everyone who is joining us at the virtual table. Here is Laura Washington.
Welcome, friends, to another edition, a hot edition of At the Virtual Table. As always, we've ramped up our digital offerings to bring you all of what we have wherever you are. Please subscribe. You got to subscribe to the Sun-Times and get the new Sun-Times e-paper. That's Lynn's favorite paper. That's the daily digital replica of the print product that lives at paper.suntimes.com. It's a special digital offer that you're going to hear about tonight just for you that gives you unlimited access to both the e-paper and every story on suntimes.com for only $2.49 a month. You can learn much more about how to get it and how to subscribe at suntimes.com/subscribe. Now, as always, we have a great show for you tonight. We're going to kick it off with a conversation with U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, a conversation we taped earlier today. And then later you're going to hear from Rachel Hinton, our very own Chicago Sun-Times crack political reporter who covers all the hot topics in politics in Chicago and Illinois. Now, to introduce our first guest, U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth is a Iraq War veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and former Assistant Secretary to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Senator Duckworth served in the Reserve Forces for 23 years before retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2014. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016 after representing Illinois' 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. In 2018, she became the first senator to give birth while serving in office and is now the mother of 2. Among many other issues we're going to discuss, Senator Duckworth has advocated for family-friendly policies and in fact worked to secure rules changes in the Senate that now allows senators to bring their infant children to the Senate floor. More to come, and now here's Lynn Sweet, my co-host for this show and Sun-Times Washington Bureau Chief. Lynn, take it away.
Senator Duckworth, thank you very much for joining us at the virtual table. I want to jump right in and ask what the status is right now of the Build Back Better legislation. As we speak, the House might begin debate on the big $1.75 trillion social spending plan. Its fate seems uncertain in the Senate because of concerns of Senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona. What is your prognosis?
I think we're going to move it. Right now, we're just finalizing the final details, talking with both Senators Manchin and Sinema, but there's broad consensus across the Democratic caucus. And really, we aired out a lot of our differences before we went home for the homework period last week. And now I think we're just finalizing things. What we're doing right now is passing the defense budget, and that's giving us time to iron out some of the details. So I'm actually very optimistic that we're going to very soon get help out to families all across, not just Illinois, but the country.
So what do you see are the sticking points in this final round? Oh, wait, let me back up. The House version that will be sent to you may not be what the Senate takes up, right? How will you approach it? Will you just, in a sense, do your own thing when it gets to you?
Well, I don't know what the leadership is going to do. It just depends on what their final version comes out at and how far it is from what we have negotiated here in the Senate. It's likely that we would do our own thing, but then we would have, to send our version over to the House. But if we can take the House version and adjust it a little bit and, vote on the House version and then reconcile it, that would probably be the way to go forward and the fastest way. But I'm not quite sure where negotiations is right now. As I said, we're just finalizing some of the details, some of the drug pricing issues, for example, which drugs, how long, what time period, that sort of thing.
Well, how do you deal with, one of the big things going on right now is boosting the electric vehicle industry. We had that in the infrastructure bill, which we'll get to. I know Laura has will question you about that. Joe Manchin seems opposed to some of the electric vehicle provisions. He has differences of opinion on climate than Sinema. And most central, if you could address, he seems to have questions about 4 weeks of paid leave for childcare. What do you think is going to happen on that in the Senate?
Well, I think an all of the above approach when it comes to green energy is the way to go. People don't realize how big an energy state Illinois is. We have more nuclear reactors than any other state. We have more coal miners actually than West Virginia does, active coal miners, and retired coal miners as well. We have biofuels. We created 100,000 new jobs in wind power. What I said to Joe Manchin, and he likes where I'm coming from, is we should be agnostic on how we get to energy to carbon neutral. Let's set the carbon neutral date. And then if we're going to help electric vehicles, we should also be helping carbon capture and sequestration. We should also be helping nuclear. We should also be helping wind and solar. And so let's make sure that we provide the same level of aid to each of those industries and just hold firm to that carbon neutral date and then let the marketplace move us there. Other nations are going to be using coal for the long run. I'd rather Illinois develop and sell them the clean coal or the carbon capture sequestration technology than for that to develop somewhere else. And so those are the conversations I have with Joe. I think we can move forward on it. There's real good news for Illinois in the bill, especially with Rivian, in that we have negotiated the cost of a vehicle that you're going to be getting a tax credit for, and it's going to go up to $85,000 for a truck. And that will cover the trucks that Rivian will be producing, which is very exciting for the folks in Bloomington Normal.
Right, and just so folks do know, that would be the largest EV truck producer in the state right now, though others may be on board. Say, could you take us behind the scenes? What is it like to try and talk to Kyrsten Sinema? People see a lot of Joe Manchin. Have you been talking to her about provisions in this Build Back Better bill? And how do you talk to her, approach her? Let us be your fly on the wall.
Well, she and I were freshmen together, so we have actually a very good relationship. She and I have known each other now since 2012, well before 2012, when we were on the campaign trail together, when we first ran for the House respectively. And we both represented very moderate conservative House districts. 80% of my territory was Henry Heights. She represented a very moderate district in Arizona. I truly feel that she wants to land this thing. And those are the conversations I have with her, which is, whatever your concerns are, let's just land this thing and get this thing passed, Kyrsten. Not getting it passed is the solution we don't want. So, and she's committed. She said, Tammy, no one wants to land this bill more than I do. And so those are the conversations I have with her. I don't get into the nitty gritty of specific, is it going to be 6 years on drugs, or is it going to be 7 years? But what I tell her is you have to commit to actually getting this thing passed. And she's made that commitment.
And what do you think? What do you think, Senator, is the sticking point for her? I mean, without getting into the nitty gritty, what is she so reluctant about, and what will it take to get her there?
Well, she said the overall cost, but the two things that have come up repeatedly that she's brought up are, one, she did not want to reverse the Trump tax cuts. She said she didn't want to do anything with taxes that was tied to rates. So that's when we came up with the billionaires fair tax, minimum tax for billionaires. For companies like Amazon that made $10 billion in profits and paid nothing in taxes, they should pay at least a 15% fair tax. Jeff Bezos, declared $80,000 in income last year, and that's what he paid taxes on. That's not very fair. So that's where we came up with the alternative to that. And then the other thing is the drug pricing, which I really disagree with her on, but I think we can get to a place where we can pass a bill that she and I can both vote on. I want Medicare to be able to negotiate for lower drug pricing. That'll raise upwards of $700 billion and stabilize Medicare. She doesn't support that, but she does support certain changes. For example, insulin. People should not have to pay more than $35 a month for insulin. And right now it's upwards of $500. So that's good. And in certain drugs, we're going to phase in the drug pricing negotiation over time.
So one thing before we turn to infrastructure, do you think Democrats have raised unrealistic expectations on the immigration part of Build Back Better? There had been talk of providing a pathway to citizenship in this measure, but because of the rules that you will be passing it by with only Democratic votes, everything has to be related to a budget item, and the Senate parliamentarian may rule this out. There is language that will come to, I believe, that will create a safe haven for people, many people here who are here undocumented, but it doesn't put them on a path to citizenship. Do you see any way that there can be a path to citizenship right now and get it past the parliamentarian? And I know how hard Dick Durbin is trying to figure out this language, hasn't so far. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, you're right about Dick Durbin trying as hard as he can on this. He has been doing this for 20 years. And he said time and again that, every time he brings a pathway to citizenship to the floor, it gets stopped by the filibuster. So where my position is let's pass whatever we can. It's not going to be what we want, but whatever we can get past a parliamentarian, let's pass that. And if it's a safe haven, let's do that. And then let's talk about the need to modify and restore the filibuster to what it was, and to pass the Voting Rights Act, to pass several pieces of legislation that are critical to American people. And I think immigration will probably be one of them.
On it. Okay, Laura, I want to toss to you an infrastructure. Sure. And then when we finish that, we're going to turn back to just some hardcore politics. So
there's so much to talk about. Thank you, Lynn.
Now I'm nervous.
That's the good part. That's the good part.
For re-election, and but anyway, we're going to go back to infrastructure, Laura.
But and of course, that is a bill that has passed and has been signed into law and is going to happen for sure. Massive infrastructure bill, which includes significant funding for Illinois, particularly around public transportation to help the CTA, RTA, Metra, PACE. And you've been very instrumental and very much an advocate for that funding. So tell us the landscape of what that's going to look like in terms of what will come to Illinois, how that will be divided up, and how the decisions are going to get made on where that money and how that money gets spent.
Well, what's going to be great about this? There are two things that I worked on significantly in this bill that I was the lead for all the Democrats on. One was the wastewater and drinking water infrastructure piece. Illinois has exponentially more lead pipes than any other state in the nation. We have 23% of the total lead pipes in the nation are in Illinois, and most of it is in Cook County because that was building code into the 1980s. Yeah. Was we were like the last municipality, the last county that actually kept lead pipes as a requirement in our building code all the way into the 80s. And so that money you're going to see come out right away across the country, but especially in the Chicagoland area, because what we did was we used the state water revolving grant fund. It's basically a fund that already exists, but never has enough money in it for all of the projects, water projects that apply for money across the country. It's like you have a bank account and they only have $5 in it, but you have $500 in need. Well, we just put in a whole bunch of money into that fund, and now we're going to be able to move a lot of these projects. And so I saw Mayor Lightfoot this week, and she's very excited to get some of the infrastructure projects specifically related to lead moving. The governor said the same thing. We were all three of us at the bill signing ceremony. The other thing that I worked on, as you mentioned, is the ASAP, the All Stations Accessibility Program. That program was a creation of CTA. Dorval Carter, who's the head of the Chicago Transit Authority, took me out to show me the first CTA station that was good, that was fully wheelchair accessible. And he said, this is what they're all going to be. We have this program we created called ASAP. We're going to implement it. And in 20 years, 100% of Chicago's CTA stations will be wheelchair accessible. And that was on the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And I looked at him and I said, so a half century after the passage of the ADA is the goal? That's not good enough. What do we need to do? And he said to me, well, Tammy, it's always a priority. But when you have limited funds, you're always going to choose safety first. So I'm always going to choose to spend what funds I have on safer train cars and repairing rail before I do this. So disability access never gets the funding. If you create a fund for this, then we're going to make this move a lot faster. And so I spoke with the White House. I spoke with Secretary Buttigieg. He supported it, and we were able to get it into the bill. And now especially legacy transit systems across the country, like Chicago, Oakland, Boston, New York, are going to get all of their stations to be accessible because the funds are finally going to be there.
And how quickly will this happen? Obviously, hopefully, it's going to happen a lot sooner than the Dorval Carter originally suggested.
Yes.
What's the time frame and timetable?
The time frame is going to be 10 years. We got the first 5 years funded. We're going to come back and do the next 5 years. But just getting the first 5 years out the door is going to be significant for a lot of people, because some of the accessibility issues is it's a simple fix, and it's not always just wheelchair accessibility. Remember, there's going to be vision and hearing and even cognitive. The ability to buy a ticket with an app that is accessible to someone will be helpful as well.
On it. By the way, I mean, I know accessibilities are part of when I think of your portfolio in Congress, accessibility issues are a big one. So I do kind of want to note, we're speaking almost a week after your Alive Day. Am I right? This is the 17th anniversary.
Yes, yeah.
Of your being shot down. We're also speaking a few days after Veterans Day. And you use your life story in a sense to inform your legislative issues on veterans and these other matters. Could you just give us a quick update on where you are on I know you have some things going on with veterans homeless, and then we'll switch maybe to some politics and other things. I know that's one of your bigger issues too.
Yes, so homelessness among veterans has been an issue I've been working on since I was state director in Illinois. But really, it became something that was a major part of my portfolio of work when President Obama asked me to head up the executive task force on veterans homelessness when I was at the federal VA. I've been working on this issue, everything from helping veterans be able to find a job, because that is the number one determinant of whether or not a veteran becomes homeless. It's not a mental health issue. It is not post-traumatic stress. It is not untreated healthcare. The biggest determinant of whether or not someone is going to end up a homeless veteran is whether or not they can find a job. That is the start of that death spiral that leads and ends up in homelessness. And one of the things that we have an issue with right now is accessible, affordable housing. We just don't have enough of it. So I am pushing that as a big part of the Build Back Better initiative, that whatever we do, we have to have money in it for affordable housing. It is in this infrastructure deal as well. There's funding for more accessible housing, and I'm going to continue to push for that. And all of the accessible housing, affordable housing, has to be accessible and has to have components set aside for veterans. And that's going to help. But the thing that helps veterans the most is helping them find jobs and helping them access the VA and getting the care that they need. And I'm really proud that the day before yesterday, my Protecting Moms Who Serve Act passed the House. So Lauren Underwood carried it for me in the House. I carried it past the Senate, and it just passed the House with over 400 votes. And so it's going to the president's desk to be signed into law, and it deals with maternal health outcomes for military women, and especially maternal mortality rates among women of color.
I could see why you two sponsored it, because maternal health is an issue for Lauren Underwood. You have your other issues, which brings me, I hope, to a nice transition to politics. So for the moment, you're up for re-election. There is no Republican of note, or I don't think anyone, who is running against you. You do expect some Republican, or I'm just going to say it, somebody will surface to run. So for the moment, you're in good shape, unless the only names out there are Rodney Davis, who I think if he goes statewide is going to go for governor, and Adam Kinzinger, who has talked about the Senate and governor. I don't think he's interested in statewide office because he has this bigger crusade against anti-Trumpism. Do you expect, are you bracing for Rodney Davis or Adam Kinzinger to jump in your Senate race?
You know, it doesn't really matter who my opponent is for me. It's about me making sure that I'm ready. You know, when you're getting ready to do a marathon, you got to get yourself in shape first. And that's where I'm just focused on serving the people of Illinois, delivering for my constituents across the state. On the campaign side, and making sure that my campaign is healthy and ready to go, and we'll run a robust campaign. We take nothing for granted, but I can't spend my time worrying about who may or may not get into the race. I'm worried about making sure we pass Build Back Better and get universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds and all of these things that we need to deliver for the people of Illinois.
A follow-up on that, Senator, is that, yeah, there are several Republican names that Lynn has mentioned, but the big name that you hear about, who's probably not going to be running, is Ken Griffin, who, of course, is the Illinois billionaire who it's said that he wants to take out J.B. Pritzker, but he also may be interested in funding your opponent if you end up with a prominent opponent. So what do you think? Do you have a concern about the battle of the billionaires and what will happen if Ken Griffin goes all in with his wealth in Illinois races, particularly statewide races?
Yeah, the amount of money you have doesn't always result in winning. It's about whether or not you have a message and have been delivering for the people of the state. And I stand proudly on my record from the time I was in the House to now that I've been in the Senate. I think I've delivered for the people of Illinois. And so, you know, I can't control that stuff that's beyond my control. I'm just going to focus on doing my job. And the best way to counter billions of dollars is to make sure that I'm there to serve the families and the working folks all across the state, which is where I'm focused my energies on.
Say, speaking of Pritzker, you and Pritzker, in a rare move, again, where you were on a divided issue with Dick Durbin over who to pick for the new Democratic Party of Illinois chair, turned out to be Congresswoman Robin Kelly. As relations were a little frayed then, what's the state right now?
Oh, Robin's my girlfriend. She and I used to sit next to each other in oversight of government reform when Darrell Issa was the chair. I mean, if that doesn't bond you for life, I don't know what does. Now, listen, I felt my concern there was that Robin's a federal elected official still sitting, and I was concerned about the financial ethics requirements and what the laws were and what she could and could not do with fundraising. You know, we're one united party, and we're all focused on getting everybody who's on the ticket back after the election and electing more Democrats and getting more Democrats elected across Illinois. So, you know, that issue is just about, for me at any rate, about the fundraising, whether or not she could legally do fundraising. And I didn't want to put the state party in jeopardy.
Okay, speaking
she's my friend.
Of Democrats and relationships, Sean Casten, because of this new map, to carve out a new Hispanic influence district, which Democrats see as a positive, the issue now is that to do that, two Democrats were thrown together. So in 2022, the Illinois delegation will lose either Marie Newman or Sean Casten. Will you be taking sides, and do you see any way out of it? Pritzker hasn't signed the map yet, but he's expected to.
You know, I am not taking sides because I love them both. Marie has been so great on so many issues, and Sean and I worked on a lot of issues together, especially when it comes to energy policy. And because, again, Illinois is such a major energy state, and this is where he built his own personal wealth, and where his expertise is on being able to leverage green energy and make it profitable. So no, I'm not going to get involved in that. I think they're both great. I'm sure if they're both end up running against each other, whoever wins, the other person, there'll be a role for them to play in our state. Really?
Well, okay. One other thing, thank you for we have a few minutes left. This is your first time on our show, and in this last year, you had your own book come out, your memoir. We're kind of interested in that, and I just want to. You gave me a hat tip in it. For being,
I had to. You're instrumental. What, are you kidding me?
Tell people what you're talking about. I'm too modest to do that.
Okay. Well, listen, I was a patient at Walter Reed. I was just a wounded warrior. I was going to go back to my regular life at Rotary International, and I was invited to the State of the Union address. And there's a usual press call. It's very pro forma, you know, that the senator, I was Dick Durbin's guest. He goes, these are my guests, and reporters ask very softball questions, and then it goes on. And then for a lot of folks, you never hear from them again. Well, and that's the path that I was on until Lynn Sweet, being the reporter that she is, could not resist asking me a tough question. And, you know, so I was maybe 8 weeks out from my shoot down. I was still IV'd up, bandaged up, and she looked at me and she said, how do you feel about the protesters outside the gates of Walter Reed protesting the war that you just lost your legs in? You know, this is not the kind of question you ask a wounded warrior. You're supposed to give them softball questions like, what high school did you go to? And, you know, what did you have for dinner tonight with the senators? And who's your favorite senator? No, she asked me a really tough question, and I answered her. And my answer to her was, well, did I lose my legs defending the Constitution so people could protest? And
Mhm.
that caught Dick Durbin's eye. And he
And
went, and that
Durbin
made him
then-
think twice about me. And that started the relationship that led to him saying, you need to run for Congress. So really, without you as a catalyst, I don't know if I'd be here, Lynn.
Well, we have 1 minute left. Laura, do you have a final question before?
Well, I would like
we-
to to share, we get questions from the audience, Senator, and we like to always get them in where we can. And this is another sort of personal question. Sean Hill asked, what's been the most challenging thing for you during the pandemic? What's been the big challenge for you in this pandemic, personally?
Trying to hold it all together with my girls, especially the beginning, terrified. You know, I had my mother who's 80 move in with us because she was by herself in Hawaii, and I didn't want her, you know, with a raging pandemic to get sick and be stuck in Hawaii by herself. And so she moved in with us. And so we became a multi-generational household. And then I was trying to homeschool my daughters.
And how old are your daughters again?
They're now 3 and 7. Today is Abigail's 7th birthday. But I was trying to homeschool them, you know, and they each, and Abigail at the time was in pre-K, and they had 3 hours of pre-K every day that she had to do on Zoom. I mean, you and I would have trouble focusing for 3 hours straight, let alone at the time a 5-year-old. And just trying to hold it all together, like trying to keep my job together, how do I get groceries? I was bringing groceries into the garage and wiping it all down with Clorox wipes, you know, and just, I think I went through what moms across the country went through, which is how do I take care of my family and feed them and keep them safe from this deadly, deadly pandemic that we have no solutions for, you know, at the time, and continue to do my job and make sure my kids are educated. It was hard. And I'm a person of privilege, and my kids are kids of privilege. I wasn't, you know, being forced to go and work the drive-through to provide my kids with her, you know, chicken McNuggets, and not having childcare, not being able to afford childcare. So it gave me real insight. Just trying to hold it all together was really tough.
Any lessons learned or any ways you've changed because of that experience?
We need universal paid family leave. I've always said that, but it became so much more clear. We need better childcare. Nobody should have to choose between exposing themselves or exposing others. You know, if they feel sick, there are people at the beginning of this pandemic who, even though they felt sick, had to go back to work because they couldn't afford to miss 2 weeks of a paycheck. There were moms who had to leave kids at home, hoping that nobody noticed that there was an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old at home so that they could go back to work. We need universal paid family leave, and we need childcare in this country desperately.
Particularly because of people that are most impact are women,
Yes.
mothers and women like yourself.
Yes, and ultimately that's the kids, right? It's the children that are hurt in the end, and why should we should be taking care of our kids.
And speaking of the end, I know you have limited time. We appreciate you joining us, Senator Tammy Duckworth. Take care. See you next time at the virtual table.
Thank you.
And thanks to the senator. That was a great conversation. Thank you, Lynn. So now we're going to pick it up with Rachel Hinton, our political reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome, Rachel. We're glad you're with us tonight. There's lots of things to talk about. I want to kick it off with a hot story that Lynn just finished up today. That's already on our website, and that is, Lynn, you were reporting on some news about our former Chicago Inspector General, Joe Ferguson, who has weighed in on the big question that's been out there for years about whether or not Rahm Emanuel was involved in a cover-up in terms of the investigation of the Laquan McDonald case. As of course, Rahm Emanuel is up for a real primo ambassadorship right now, being considered in Congress. So, Lynn, what's the latest on that?
So here's what developed today. It turns out, according to a letter that I obtained, that Joe Ferguson wrote a letter to Senator Bob Menendez, who's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the day after Emanuel's confirmation hearing. Hovering over the hearing was the issue of what did Rahm McDonald do in terms of delaying the release of the McDonald video. However, only one senator at the hearing really pressed him about it, but it has been an issue. It was magnified because Rahm's October 20th confirmation hearing was on the anniversary of the tragic shooting of Laquan McDonald. So it turns out, according to the letter that Ferguson wrote the day after which turned out to be 6 days after he stepped down as the Inspector General in City Hall, is that he wrote quite a detailed letter explaining the system, explaining why it was imperfect, but Rahm did nothing illegal and in fact did follow the procedures in not releasing the video.
Well, Lynn, that's interesting timing. Yeah. And why, do you know what the impetus for that letter was and why it came? You know, Ferguson was not even any longer in office. What was behind that?
It came the day after the hearing, which put a spotlight on the role of the former mayor. And from what I gather is that Ferguson, now that he was free from being the Inspector General, just wanted to set the record straight. Now, hey, I'm not naive. Does a letter like this really help Emanuel? Because it's a third-party independent validator saying what, in essence, what Rahm has been saying all along, and what he very much said at the hearing is that he did, you know, a cover-up is a serious crime. You know, you just can't toss that word around as if it's nothing. And Rahm's never been accused of it officially. And that Ferguson said, I looked into it and found nothing. And we have the text of the letter that Ferguson wrote. If you look at suntimes.com, if you look at my story, we have it as an attachment. So let me give you an update of where Rahm's nomination to be the next US ambassador to Japan stands. He passed out of the committee with only 2 no votes, 2 Democrats, Jeff Merkley and Ed Markey of Massachusetts. The confirmation date hasn't been set. And here's what's ironic here. So the progressive wing of the Democratic Party on their own can't block Rahm Emanuel from being confirmed as ambassador. It turns out doing the work for them are 2 Republican senators, Ted Cruz of Texas and Josh Hawley of Missouri. They are blocking most diplomatic appointments, nothing to do with Rahm Emanuel, but they, in a sense, get the benefit of it. So if those issues are cleared up, I expect Rahm to easily win confirmation because he has a bunch of Republicans, at least 5, maybe 6. One this morning on a TV show, Senator Todd Young of Indiana said that the Senate needs to confirm Rahm. So even if he loses a few votes, from the Democratic side, I think he's in good shape to be confirmed. And I have a sense that the letter, which I see the White House welcomed, I believe,
I'm sure they did,
can help also in a longer range, Joe Biden, who will, this will be a black mark against him by the progressive wing. By the way, I think there's a lot bigger fish to fry in many other issues right now in the infighting between moderate Democrats and the progressive wing than this. Bottom line is the progressives were not strong enough to block the nomination. That's when they really would have been able to make a difference. Once it's there, I think the train left the station. Only thing to watch now is how much time Rahm Emanuel's confirmation to be ambassador, as well as other ambassadorships, are delayed, using the tactic that Republicans, Cruz and Hawley, are using. Cannot deny a confirmation eventually, but it sure can delay it.
Well, can delay it, but it's probably going to happen. It's probably much more likely to happen because of the little assist from Joe Ferguson. I wonder, I don't know how unusual it is for an Inspector General, either a sitting one or a former one, to step out into that spotlight and make that effort to set the record straight. But that in many ways, that sounds like Joe Ferguson in the sense that he's always been a straight shooter. He's never pulled his punches. He's always been perceived as being fair-minded. Rachel, what's your take on it? You've been watching Ferguson, and you know how City Hall works. Did you find this unusual, and is this surprising to you that Ferguson would step out like that?
It was surprising given the timing of it, that he, as a newly free man, free from, his post as Inspector General, would come out with this letter in kind of defense of the former mayor. But I agree with what you said. I don't believe that he's a person who pulls punches. I don't think that he's someone who would kind of dump on a former mayor or another political figure just to do that. And even in the letter, he said, while concerns are fair and while it makes sense that people are asking these questions, I really want to set the facts straight. And I think for him, it really is about setting the facts straight. Yes, be upset with Mayor Emanuel for the way that this all shook out, but you need to understand that factually, he didn't do anything wrong. He's not, he didn't partake in a cover up. I know that there are many people who still believe that there are concerns around that, but my office did this investigation. We were tasked with it. We didn't find any evidence of that. And I want to set that record straight. So I don't think that is surprising. I think that he wants to make sure that the Inspector General's office isn't besmirched in any way, and also wants to clarify things. This is an interesting time. You have a former mayor going for a pretty plum job. People are upset about it, rightfully so, given the tragedy. So I think that he wants to, given the circumstances around this and the hubbub, the uproar, make sure that be upset, but also make sure that people are upset for the right reasons, or don't drag my former office's name through the mud, basically.
And I think there has been some movement in terms of Rob Emanuel's willingness to talk about this and willingness to acknowledge, if not, he's denying a cover-up, but he does come pretty close during the confirmation hearings in his commentary there to saying that maybe he could have done things differently. Maybe there should have been a better approach to this, and that he had regrets about that. So that's some progress. Speaking of City Hall, Rachel, I want to move to another story that you've been covering this week, a story about the FOP president, John Catanzara, who many people believe was on the verge of being fired because of some charges that have been pending against him for a while in the police department. And he decided instead to quit before he could be fired, and announced he's going to continue to be the FOP president, but he's also planning on running for mayor against Mayor Lori Lightfoot if she decides to run for office. So I guess a lot of people are wondering, Rachel, how can he continue to, he's quitting the police department, how can he continue to run the police union and be the president of the police union? And how can he, from that position, run for mayor? Is that legal? Are there any potential conflicts of interest there?
I believe the union's rules allow for former retired police officers to be the president. I believe the president that he beat to become the union president was a retired police officer, or was no longer active duty. So that's allowable. Whether or not he chooses to actually run for mayor, I believe that that's also allowed. I don't know that he'll have to pick and choose between those two roles. I think there might be a push for him to either remain FOP president or not run for office. But he has been very vocal about not giving up the one office in favor of the other. He says that the city will have to deal with him. And that's why even though he's, left his job, he's retired from the police department, he's still going to be a thorn in the side of Mayor Lightfoot. I don't think that we've seen the last of him. And not only because he says he's going to run for mayor. That's still, a year off, more than a year off.
Well, here's what he gets out of saying it. It gives him a bigger platform. So he is pretty good at getting press attention, but even if he never ends up running for mayor, I think his political play is, say you're running because now you have to get some more attention. It is the biggest trial balloon around. Doesn't mean he's really going to run. He doesn't even have to put together a campaign committee. As long as he's out there, he gets, in a sense, a bigger platform that he would have than if he were not running for mayor and he were merely the FOP president. So, politically, the union has evolved as a political force, just as the CTU has evolved as a political force on the left. The FOP is evolved as a political force on the right. And here's an example, if I could dovetail into a story I did.
Well, before you move, Lynn, I think I want to make the point, though, that I think that he is serious about running. As you say, Lynn, he doesn't necessarily have to do all the machinations, have the campaign committee, but I think he's going to be a serious, or at least he thinks he's going to be a serious candidate. He has a base. As he says, he has a base. I think he certainly has support within the Chicago Police Department. He may be able to get some union support. He has a huge platform already and a very high profile, particularly for someone who has never been in politics before and has never really been in government before. So he has everything to gain and nothing to lose by running. So I see him as being a serious candidate. Whether or not he'll be successful, one is another story.
Plus, it's over 16 months away. It's
Yeah, sure.
2 years away. So he doesn't need to raise money. He doesn't need to do any of those things. He can just keep saying incendiary things about the mayor or the city, and then say, "I'm running for mayor. Vote for me." And people, that'll drum up support, or that'll drum up attention.
But Rachel, that is my point.
Yeah.
We have many leaders of organizations that say stuff that don't get, that what they say doesn't resonate. Because he says he's in play. That would be the same thing if a CTU leader said, "I may run for mayor." All of a sudden, you get a little more, you get a lot more attention, because it's seen not only in a, it's seen in a far more political lens. So now I want to, if I may, transition to a related story, which I think also speaks to the emerging political power of the FOP, force on the right, seen just as maybe a counter, as it might turn out in the city, to this Chicago Teachers Union, a force on the left. And this is it. So I have a story that posted last night in the Thursday paper on how Congressman Rodney Davis, he's a Republican from downstate Illinois. He may run for another House term. He got a good map that the state Democrats gave him in the congressional remap. He's also been talking about maybe running statewide. I think it's governor, not senator. So he came to the FOP on Monday with a member of the House, a Republican who's leading an American Security Task Force. It's just a Republican play, but they met with representatives of law enforcement unions. Now, when I wrote the story, I wasn't sure if John Catanzara was there. After the show tonight, I'm going to go update it. That, as you see, that's a picture of Rodney Davis at the FOP headquarters in Chicago. So this gave him a chance to talk to representatives of multiple police unions in the area. It is, I think, a hat tip to their influence. It also made it clear in the statement I got from Davis that if he runs, it's on a real tough law and order platform. He blasted Pritzker, blasted Kim Foxx in his comments afterwards, basically saying that they're soft on crime. So I think you see the outlines of what would be a statewide campaign if he decides to run. And the other point is, and Rachel, I'm so interested in your analysis, because you know the other four men running for governor. We have over this, Laura mentioned in talking to Tammy Duckworth, that you have billionaire Ken Griffin promising to bankroll a candidate against another billionaire, J.B. Pritzker. I don't see how of the four out there, there's anyone really worth spending tens of millions of your own money on. Rodney Davis has far more stature, even though he is not known in the Chicago area. He is known in central Illinois. He just has more experience in governing than these others do. So, Rachel, could you kind of handicap where you think the Republican primary is now in the governor's race?
I don't think it's finished. I think we're still waiting for the candidates who can get the backing of Ken Griffin, the anointing. People really need money, especially to go against a billionaire governor. So I think we're
talking about the primary first. Who could survive? Tell us about of the four people and who you think has it together the most.
So we have Darren Bailey, a state senator from downstate Illinois, from Xenia. He's a farmer. We have a venture capitalist, Jesse Sullivan, also from downstate. We have a former state senator, Paul Schimpf, and then Gary Rabine, who is a businessman from, I believe, Bull Valley. None, except for the two state senators, have experience in politics, and the two state senators don't have the name recognition that they need or the ability.
I don't think any of them.
None of them do, but I mean, at least those two have experience in state politics. Right. But I don't believe that they'll be able to get Ken Griffin's backing, especially if no one else enters this race. Maybe, Ken Griffin is going to size up. He's going to handicap the race and decide, okay, I can give money to this person. I think I can back this person, or maybe he sits it out.
That was going to say, Rachel. Maybe he sits it out until he just sits out the primary to see who survives, and then he saves a little bit of his cash for the general.
Yeah. So I wrote last week about Ken Griffin's comments, saying that he's going to make sure he wants Pritzker to be a one-term governor. He's going to make sure that he goes all in for whoever decides to run against him. I sought clarity on, are you saying you're going to sit out the primary, or are you saying that you're going to, start supporting someone now in the primary? No response. But who knows? I mean, he could be playing a pretty smart political game to see, okay, who wins, who comes out of this? Do I like their politics? Do I like their policies? Do I feel comfortable giving them my millions of dollars? Probably.
Here's how I think it would work if the candidates are seen as weak, or right now the front runner, it seems to me, the guy who has it together the most in terms of a base is State Senator Darren Bailey. He is the most Trumpiest of this group. They're all Trumpian, and so it's Trumpiest. Rodney Davis even has evolved as a Trump-allied person, but Darren Bailey's kind of all in on the whole Trumpism thing, denialism, anti-vax, anti-this, of course, Pritzker, but they all are. I think that Griffin, if it just is the field of 4 or other lesser known kind of weak candidates who don't have a story to tell, if all they're going to do is say I'm against Pritzker, and they all, I know they might have thoughtful things to say about pension reform or running the prisons, but this election is going to come just as J.B. Pritzker is cutting ribbons all over the state, because the results of his Rebuild Illinois program, which is a capital project, which now has the extra billions of dollars from the infrastructure bill that will benefit everyone in Illinois, even if your representatives voted against it, which 4 of the 5 Republicans did. So the play for Ken Griffin is just have a third-party independent expenditure. You go negative on Pritzker, and then the Griffin view would be whatever Republican that surfaced from the primary, weak as they may be, don't spend your time defending them. You spend your tens of millions just softening up and trying to take down Pritzker, and then and then play it that way, because you might not trust your messaging to the campaign. In round.
That's a very real possibility that we could see, especially if no one else jumps into this race, or no one else who is to Ken Griffin's liking does that.
Which is why I think Rodney Davis right now is the only kind of available Republican who has stature. I know he's not known to much of our audience, but he's better known than these other guys, and he's just more. He is a. What's funny is I could walk down State Street with Rodney Davis, and I don't know if people would recognize him. He is very well known within the Capitol. He was a top staffer for now retired Congressman John Shimkus. He's an institutionalist. He's on the House Administration Committee. He cares about the culture of the institution. And even though in this Trump era, where the Trumpists in the Republican Party are trying to destroy our civic institutions, trying to tear them down, Davis does have a sense of how Congress works. He took a turn, I think, right when he was appointed by House Leader McCarthy to the January 6th committee, along with others. When Nancy Pelosi nixed 2 or 3 of the others, she would have accepted Rodney Davis. Then McCarthy pulled them all. So that kind of pushed Davis a little further into the Trumpian camp than I thought he would go, but he did. And by the way, I want to give just acknowledgement that in the vote to pass the infrastructure bill, and in the vote on whether or not to censure Republican Paul Kozar for the horrible attack he made on Twitter against another member of Congress, a Democrat, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it was Adam Kinzinger who voted to censure him. Adam Kinzinger was one of 13 Republicans to vote for the infrastructure bill. And just real quick,
Lynn, we need to share. We need to share. Go ahead, quickly.
Go. You go.
Okay, all right. I want to get to another state. We have a couple more things we want to get to with Rachel. Another statewide race that's kind of starting to heat up now is the Secretary of State's race, which has already had at least 4 Democrats who've already been competing for months. But there hasn't been much happening on the Republican side until this week, Rachel, when State Representative Dan Brady has jumped in and said he's going to run. Could you tell us more about Dan Brady, who he is and why he's getting in now?
He's been a state rep representing Bloomington. He's from Bloomington or the Bloomington area. He's been a state rep since 2001. Before that, McLean County coroner. He, announced, I believe, 2 days ago that he would be seeking, his party's nomination for the Secretary of State position. I think that, his entry into the race comes as people are doing the political calculus and looking at the new map, especially as a legislator. The map has been signed, so you are slightly more sure of what your future looks like. And then deciding, do I want to make a jump to something bigger or do I want to wait? I think that this comes at a time when he feels like he can, put it all together, put all the pieces together, get the money, get the name recognition, do all the travel. Whether or not that's possible, whether or not we're going to see Dan Brady as Secretary of State or, see him even get the party's nomination, I think that remains in question. But somebody's got to be the first one to jump in, and so I think that he has similar ideas to what many of the Democrats have talked about, modernizing the office, making sure that wait times go down. People are sick of waiting in lines, especially now in a pandemic. Nobody wants to wait in a line. Nobody wants to wait in a building for an hour or 2 hours. So he's addressing some of those things. But whether or not he's going to be the Republican candidate to get that message across, I think remains to be seen. Republicans
where does he stand
previously?
Where does he stand? He's longtime legislator, so he probably has a lot of relationships. Where is he staying with the Republican Party leadership and the big names of the Republican Party? Have any of them stepped forward for him yet?
He has the backing of the House Republican leader, the Illinois House Republican leader, and a few others, as well as former legislators. I don't believe off the top of my head that he has the Illinois Republican Party chairman's backing. Not at this time. It's also early, so I think that those are some of the endorsements that he's beginning to try to look for and seal up before anybody else can jump in this race.
Is he? You mentioned that this is a time when a lot of people are looking at the remap and figuring out where they stand. Was he in trouble in his own district? Is that one reason why he's making the jump, or did he have a pretty secure place for reelection?
More secure than some of the others. He wasn't mapped into a district with 3 or 4 other incumbents, but I think the remap presents people an option or a chance to question whether or not they want to stay where they are or do something bigger, potentially try to jump forward. And I think that that's why he chose to make that leap. And
what's happening on the Democratic side? As I mentioned, there's what 4 fairly prominent Democrats that are already in that race. How is that shaping up so far?
It still seems pretty quiet, waiting for more endorsements to come out. I believe the AFL-CIO will be doing something, I believe either in December or January. So I think that'll be one of the next big endorsements to watch for. The Cook County Democratic Party will have its slating days next month, the 13th and 14th. That will be a key endorsement to get. So I think right now people are still doing the political calculus that they need to determine, do I have enough money on my own currently to get this, to be able to put up a big battle or a good enough battle to get the nomination and then move on to the general. But there's still a lot of things in flux.
Well, let's be more, let's deal with, we're talking about, I think the 2 frontrunners right now are Alexi Giannoulias, the former state treasurer, who ran unsuccessfully for Senate, and Anna Valencia, who is the city of Chicago clerk. I think out of the field, they're the 2 who are the most active and have the biggest statewide campaigns.
And the most money.
And the other, just for the record, the other 2 candidates, Rachel, are
Pat Dowell, Alderman Pat Dowell, and then Alderman David Moore. I believe Dowell is 3rd district and Moore 17th.
Right. So they have a base, and then, and you only need a plurality to win the nomination. And, my God, by the way, everyone, our primary is going to be in June next year, not March. So, whoa, do we have time here? Petitions start in January. So how do you handicap this? Let's do the front runners here, Giannoulias and Valencia. Strength, weakness. Rachel,
I think money is definitely going to be not the deciding factor, but a deciding factor. Giannoulias is by far and away leading that race. He also has many endorsements and not just of former office holders or current office holders. He also has unions, and not ones that he may be somehow connected to. Valencia doesn't have that. She has money, she has some endorsements, but I think she's going to need to overcome the amount of money that Janulius has. Once you have, I think he has, I looked the other day, is over $3.4 million in the bank. So once you have that much money,
And
and it's no vendor,
what does Valencia have cash on hand?
I believe 400 or so,
Yeah.
300 or
Right.
400.
Which in another time and place would be respectable, but it.
Yeah, but
And this rate
perception,
really, make a difference. So she's going to have to overcome that, and she's going to have to figure out the money and the endorsements, and she has time to do it, but all the many endorsements have already been snagged, waiting to see what these next big people decide to do. I wouldn't want to wait for big names to come in at the last second and throw their weight behind me, because you have to overcome a
you're already
deficit.
behind,
And
sure.
here's what's really interesting in the Secretary of State race, because the functions of the job aren't all that ideological. Is there a right wing or left wing way to improve wait times for your driver's license? And within a Democratic primary, you may not have the divisions between moderates and progressives. It may, boil down to what? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. There's, each of them have an ethnic base. Clearly, we would have the first female Secretary of State of Valencia. One, I'm trying to figure out what it is that they will use. She has ideas, he has ideas, and all this. It will be also, how will they figure out how to navigate within the attention that will soon come as we get closer to June with the overwhelming other contests going on here. But before
I wanted to correct myself quickly. Valencia has over 700,000 on hand.
Thank you for double checking that.
Yeah.
Okay, and she has fundraising ability. He has enormous fundraising ability. How do you handicap J.B. Pritzker as we're in our final minutes here? Rachel, where do you think, if there were a Republican who could muster a major campaign against him, what's his plus? What's his most vulnerable point? What's his biggest asset? I know his biggest asset is his money in terms of the politics, but he has a lot of policies that he's been working on. Which ones do you think would make a difference?
I guess I would start with the weaknesses or things that they could jab at. The fair tax failed. I would say that that's a big point that people, especially the Republicans that I've spoken to, that they've pointed to. That wasn't popular. Obviously, it's the timing. You put on a tax hike, what was billed as a tax hike by Republicans on a ballot during a pandemic. People are going to question that. So I think that could be something that's used against him by a smart Republican candidate. I think that, overwhelmingly, though, he's gotten many things passed. This climate bill that he got passed had a lot of the things that he wanted in it. The first draft, the draft that he presented, and the final draft, while there are obviously differences because you have to make compromises, there's still a lot of the things that he wanted in it. So that, I would say that the Rebuild Illinois plan, so this is repaving our roads, this is adding bike trails, this is doing a lot of infrastructure work. That's another thing he could point to. I think Republicans are upset because some of the tax credits that they agreed on, Pritzker rolled back under his budget for this year. So he's not making friends maybe in that way, but I think that he's gotten a lot of policy wins that fair tax loss might hurt him or could be a thing that he gets needled on next year.
On it. Well, we're in our final minute here. I want to thank you, Rachel Hinton, for joining us for this fast moving discussion on politics.
We covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yes. More.
I'd also add COVID just for Pritzker. COVID's hard. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you for bringing it up, because yes.
Good point.
Oh, wow. Stop before we say goodbye, Rachel, thank you for bringing it up. When we talk about the stuff that may need, where we are in the pandemic when it gets closer to election, probably will have a lot of play on whether or not the governor's policies, which did engender opposition among Republicans and gave them a unity in some ways, whether or not there's a backlash or not. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing it up. So now, On behalf of Laura and I, we also want to thank our producer and directing team, Melissa Billmeyer and Brian Ernst. We want to thank Senator Tammy Duckworth for being with us tonight. Our next show, mark it on your calendar, please, December 16th, the third Thursday in December. In fact, just go through your calendar and try and mark the third Thursday every month, because that's when we're going to try and find you. You find us. If there's a change, we'll let you know. Meanwhile, I want to tell you about my beloved Sun-Times e-paper and the wonderful offer that we have for our viewers. You can get the Sun-Times e-paper, which is our daily digital replica of the Sun-Times, for only $2.49 a month. It duplicates our print product. It gives you unlimited access to the Sun-Times and every story in the Sun-Times. Read all about it at suntimes.com/subscribe, suntimes.com/subscribe. So I am going to look tomorrow and see if our subscriptions have jumped from people from this show. If you have any questions, email me and I'll get you to the right place to subscribe if you have any problems. Anyway, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for joining us on the November edition of At the Virtual Table.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.